All right. And welcome to our webinar, What the IG Maturity Index Report 2020 is Telling Us. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the Executive Director of Content and Programming at ARMA, and I'll be your host and a participant in today's webinar. For those who have attained your IGP, the Information Governance Professional Certification, today's webinar counts towards one continuing education credit in the information management category. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, feel free to ask in the Q&A box. We are unlikely to get to all questions, but we will respond to any questions received after the webinar has concluded. ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing business partners and solutions for all of your information governance needs, I hope you'll give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you, solution providers like NetGovern. Before we get started, I want you to consider doing something great for yourself, all while helping support ARMA this year. ARMA professional members continue to say over and over again that they're wildly satisfied with what they're receiving as a professional member of ARMA. Over 95% of our members say that they would recommend ARMA membership to their colleagues, and I don't know of any other association that comes even close on that metric. ARMA is on the rise, and we need you to help us get the message out. The people who are managing and governing information in their organizations, only a small percentage of those folks are ARMA members. That needs to change, and we need your help getting the word out. Remember that feeling you had when you first discovered ARMA and all of the resources that you gained access to as a professional member? I want you to take a moment this week and share that feeling with a colleague, a friend, a member of your chapter. Get other people on the path towards information success, and encourage your company or organization to make everyone who's managing or governing information a member of ARMA International. We even offer group discounts to make it easier for you to connect your entire company or organization with ARMA. Share the feeling of knowing that you are not alone in this. Share ARMA professional membership. ARMA InfoCon 2020. It's going to be incredible. We're heading to the Motor City, the home of Motown, the land of Kiss, Detroit Rock City. You cannot miss our signature event from October 26th to 28th, 2020. Registration is now open, so you can head to arma.org/infocon and get registered now. Now I have the honor of introducing our presenters for today's discussion. Today we have a panel of heavy hitters in the information governance profession. Pierre Chamberlain is the founder and chief energizing officer of NetGovern. Welcome, Pierre. We also have joining us Michael Osterman, the president of esteemed research organization Osterman Research. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
We also have leading this discussion Ann Snyder, the manager of content development here at ARMA International. Welcome, Ann.
Hello, everyone.
We're sharing and discussing the results of the Information Governance Maturity Index Report 2020 in this webinar today. The report itself and the downloadable graphics pack will be available next week. Before we dive into the results, I want to turn this over to Pierre to discuss how this project and its related report came to be.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here today. We're really happy to be the primary sponsor of this initiative. The genesis of this report started at the Canadian ARMA conference about 9 months ago, where Nick, you'll remember we were sitting together and we were talking about the fact that there was a vacuum in terms of authoritative information about how we were doing as an industry. And as a result of that, we really felt that it was holding the industry back, it was holding practitioners back, because what we were seeing was, in fact, a lot of conversations of opinion that really weren't business driven, that weren't enabling organizations to take steps into the right direction and to make the right kind of investments that needed to be made in terms of their information governance. And so, together we kind of, through this concept back and forth, and you were brave enough to take it in front of the ARMA board and say, I think the time has come, for us to move away from these conversations of opinion and really be able to get hard evidence in terms of how, as an industry, are we in fact doing? Where is the maturity level and where is it trending to? And have that as a clear benchmark so that everybody involved in the information governance space can start to look internally to the IG model and decide what investments that they want to make in order for them to be at or better than their peers on what we know is never a destination. It's a journey. We're continuously improving the way that we work together, to preserve and protect and secure the informational assets of our organizations, making sure that we're good stewards of these information assets. And so, we kicked it off at InfoCon with a very aggressive push, and the response from the community was phenomenal and very encouraging. Mike was instrumental in terms of helping us design and conduct a survey in a way that was both scientifically sound and that would ensure that the data that we got out of this was trusted data, and that we can continue to work with this program for hopefully many, many years to come, and go from the level that we've achieved today to even further insight across geographies, across vertical markets, across size of organizations, so that we're moving in the right direction. And like I said, that we have the evidence required to make the right kind of investments, whether those are investments in policy, or in process, or in technology, and that we sort of clear the mist or clear the fog around where we're at, and that we have the tools required to make bold decisions and help our organizations forward. And so, thank you to ARMA leadership for deciding that this was indeed a good initiative, and thank you to everybody who responded to the survey, and especially to Anne for all the hard work that went into the creation of this report, and what we'll hear today in terms of the interpretation of the results, and how we think this will continue to impact our profession.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. I'd like to echo that. I truly believe that we're moving into the next phase of maturity of the information governance profession. One that's going to rely on data rather than opinion. I like that, clearing the mist, clearing the fog, and this project is going to continue to help us move this profession forward. I know that we all are incredibly thankful for the support of NetGovern on this project, and having you join us here as the founder and CEO of NetGovern shows your organizational commitment to this work. So thank you, Pierre, for your support here.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Absolutely.
To talk through our agenda for this webinar, I'm going to turn things over to the magnificent Anne Snyder.
Okay, I hope I can live up to that. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the first objectives. This will echo some of what Pierre just talked about, the objectives of this survey and this maturity index. We'll get into the design and methodology, including the relationship of this index to the IGIM, the maturity scale that we used, and then Michael will talk to us a little bit about the survey deliver and data analysis that we applied. Then we'll turn to the results and analysis of the data. We'll look at respondent demographics pretty quickly. Then we'll talk about maturity levels that we saw across each of the maturity measures we looked at. And then we'll look at a comparison of IG program maturity levels side by side. So you can see how the different 8 measures stack up against one another. And then finally, we'll turn to conclusions and next steps, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer section. So our objectives. So to build a little bit on what Pierre said, we're going to start first with the survey objectives. The survey was designed to be a data-driven point-in-time measure of maturity of organizations' IG programs. It was to serve as a reference point for a year-over-year comparison of IG program maturity and progress. and to serve as an industry benchmark against which organizations could compare the state of their IG programs. And finally, it was to serve as an aid for effective program implementation and improvement. And we did this by tying the index to the IGIM, and we're tying it currently to IGM aligned resources. And we'll talk about those toward the end of this session. So to the design and methodology that we used. To achieve the objectives that we discussed, we designed a survey to be that was relatively simple so that it could be repeatable. And to that end, you know, I think a lot of surveys, and I think Michael can talk to this too, a lot of surveys attempt to achieve too much. They ask too many questions. You end up with survey fatigue. So we tried to limit it to just a set of basic demographic questions and then only asked 8 questions assessing IG maturity. And to make it a more effective aid, again, to IG program improvement and implementation, we tied this information to the IGIM. So some of you may already be familiar with the IGIM. Nick and I introduced this at Legal Wake this year. The IGIM offers a functional approach to information governance, and it explores the elements that need to be developed in 7 key areas that are necessary for effectively implementing an IG program. These 7 key areas that you can see here, steering committee, authorities, supports, processes, capabilities, structures, and infrastructure, are represented in this Hive infographic. And the IGIM is designed to build a common understanding that bridges the people, policies, and more across these 7 key areas. The IG maturity index that we're talking about today is aligned with this model and assesses IG program maturity overall, and then with respect to each of these measures in the maturity model. So aligning this IG maturity index to the IGIM is what allows IG professionals to define you know, a common language and also identify deficiencies with respect to these so that they can target their efforts with respect to, say, supports or steering committee or specific elements within each of these.
Sorry.
And so just to turn to the next slide, this is a more detailed version of the model, including the elements that I referred to. And now this model has been around for some time. Nick, can you give us some details about the history of this model?
Yeah, so the model came to ARMA through the merger with the Information Coalition, where we've been sharing the predecessors to this version of the model over the past actually 6 years. During that time, we validated the model with various organizations, made a few minor modifications, taking it through 8 iterations over that time frame to meet the needs of the ever-changing information governance landscape. When we brought the model over to ARMA, we validated once again and spoke with many of our top thought leaders at ARMA to get their feedback, which resulted in some additional minor modifications of the model, also adding more strongly discussions around privacy and benchmarking. That's why I'm very excited to announce that today, at this moment, the Information Governance Implementation Model, or IGIM, has been moved out of beta release and into its first official release at ARMA International. You'll see the layout's slightly different and a slightly different color scheme, but all else remains the same. The IGIM has been downloaded over 3,000 times since its inception and is already being utilized in companies, organizations, and governments around the world. Now, with this work that we're sharing today, we'll be able to validate the information governance efforts and benchmark them to assess maturity. I can't overstate how this is a giant leap forward for our profession. And would you like to share how we developed the maturity scale for this project?
Sure. All right, give me 1 second. I'm trying to advance the slide here, having a hiccup there. So before we get into the data across each of the maturity measures, we want to take a quick look at how we measured maturity. So respondents were asked to assess their organization's IG program maturity overall, and then with respect to each one of the key areas of the IGIM that we just looked at, we used a 5-point scale here that you can see. So it's typical Likert scale. We also offered the ability to opt out if they were unable to answer for some reason, if they didn't know or couldn't answer. The scale should look familiar actually to people from ARMA who are on this call. If you've used the generally accepted record keeping principles maturity model, we modeled it after that. And the idea was we wanted to enable cross comparison for people who'd used the principles maturity model to assess their organizations with respect to GARP. And so that's the reason for the fidelity across the scales. You'll have the first one here, level 3 is essential. That's the middle value. This means basically that the organization has the minimum requirements in place. The organization would still be in a reactive posture, but they're getting the job done. Levels 1 and 2 are two different levels of deficiency. One is extremely substandard, something it's basically non-existent. Level 2 is in development, so something is going on, but there are still significant gaps. And levels 4 and 5 are basically maturity levels that are beyond just having the basics, with level 5 as being, transformational. So for each of the 7 areas of the IGIM, we actually looked. We didn't just use the generic scale. We also developed levels that were specific to that area. So for steering committee, which is the first one we'll look at, we developed a level that said what a steering committee at level 3, or what the people part of your IG program might look at level 3, for example, and gave a description of what that level might be. I just also want to transition now to Mike to talk a little bit more about the survey metrics and the approach that we used. So give me 1 second. So just the survey delivery and data analysis. Michael?
Okay, great. Thank you, Ann. Yeah, basically, we debuted the survey at ARMA InfoCon 2019 in Nashville. And our goal was to basically start there. We wanted to get as many responses as we could. And quite frankly, I was surprised at how many we did get. We actually got about 2/3 of the total number of responses at the ARMA show itself. So I was very pleased with the response rate. We also had an online survey that was begun right after the ARMA show and continued through December 31st. And our goal was really to maximize the number of responses. So we used a variety of sources. The largest single additional source in addition to ARMA was our own survey panel. Osterman Research has its own survey panel. And so we basically qualified people to participate in the survey and then asked them exactly the same questions. So we compiled all of this. We actually received more than 1,200 responses, but we deleted close to 300 of them for a variety of reasons. If respondents worked for a vendor, they were disqualified. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but we didn't really want to taint the results with anything that might be vendor specific. Also, if they failed a gating question, if they didn't answer all of the survey questions and so forth. And we also had, as you'll get in any large survey, we had a few bogus responses. So we went through all of them manually. We tossed those out. And we also had a few duplicates. We had people, for example, that were at the ARMA show and responded to the survey there, but then they also received a request for an online completion of the survey. So we just deleted them. Obviously, we don't want, 2 responses from the same person. So we ended up with a total of 912 responses, which we feel provides a very solid, statistically significant level of data. And we're able to cut the data into various groups, organization size and so forth. So I was actually very pleased with the response level that we got and the information that we did receive.
Yeah, and that 912 number is an incredibly significant one. And as far as I can tell, this is the largest undertaking of assessing information governance maturity. And with the scale, we were able to say with incredible confidence that the results which we've gathered have strong validity. I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it back to you for results and analysis.
Okay, so the first thing we'll look at is organization size, the distribution of our survey respondents by organization size. You can see that we're roughly divided between respondents who were in the 1,000 plus, what we're calling large organizations. We had 53.7% in that group. And in the small and mid-size, if we group the organizations that are on the right side of the graphic here, it's about 46.3%. So later in the survey, we do divide the respondents by those measures, small and mid-size on one side and large on the others, and we'll get to that in a moment. So in terms of roles represented, we asked the respondents to select the option that best describes their role within their organization. Records management professionals, you can see, we had 43.6% saying that they were records management professionals, 14.3% said they were in information governance, 11.2% said they were in information management, and if you tally those together, that's a solid majority of survey respondents at 69.1% saying that they're in IG or IG related fields. And then our another big segment was the information technology segment, and that came in part from some survey respondents that we had from Osterman Research as well. Nick, I know you had some comments on this, the demographics here.
Yeah, and as expected, given ARMA International's membership base, obviously RIM and IG specific roles had strong representation in the survey. As Michael discussed and Ann discussed, we also added to those figures some additional representation, primarily in the technology space through the efforts of Osterman Research.
I'm having a little bit of a hiccup here on my graphics again. Okay, so industries represented. We also asked respondents to indicate the option that best described their industry. And you can see here that we have a substantial representation from government. That was about together at the federal and the state and local level. It's almost a third, 23.4%. Financial was our next biggest segment, standalone. Now, ultimately, we'd like to do further segmentation on that, but because, and Michael, you may want to comment on this, because we do have a substantial survey respondent size, 912 is great, but we didn't feel comfortable doing more divisions along these different industries. So hopefully that's something we'll be able to do in the future when we have a larger survey size.
Yes, very definitely. We typically like to have at least 100 to 125 in each segment that we're analyzing because it reduces the margin of error.
Yeah, there's a lot that we can learn from this data and that we will learn from this data as we're able to segment this in the future by industry. In this report, we didn't do any industry segmentation, but as Pierre mentioned, we will be able to leverage this data in the near future. Ann, do you want to start sharing each of the key areas?
Sure. All right, so this is the first of the key areas of the information governance implementation model, the steering committee. Think of this as the people aspect of your information governance program. So this is the organization's IG leadership team. It should have broad representation from each of the interests enumerated in this graphic here. We see information management, business units, technology, legal, risk compliance, privacy, security, and so on. If you're evaluating your organization's program maturity with respect to this area, you'd want to consider things like, does your organization have a formal or informal body tasked with IG decision making? Does that group have sufficient authority or at least influence to guide IG decisions? Does the group meet on a regular basis? And then, of course, are all of those relevant stakeholders consulted during the IG decision-making process? So we worked all of these and other considerations into the descriptions. I said for each of those 5 levels, they're specific for each of the areas of the IGIM. And we asked people to select the maturity level that they thought best described their organization on average. So those level descriptions are not perfect descriptions of where an organization is, but they were just to give an idea of what a level 3 would be compared to a level 1, for example. So here's what we found. So I want to take a moment on this first graphic just to get everyone oriented to how we're presenting these. So you can see here the 5-point scale on the bottom. So the level 1 through level 5 and the I don't knows, can't answers at the far right here. The gray bars represent total respondents. Blue represents small and mid-sized organizations. Remember, that's 999 or less. And the green represents large organizations, ones that are 1,000 or plus. You can also see these great little trend lines, which give you just sort of an idea of how the data is falling. Here you can see that there are, two, I keep losing my pointer here, 2 separate humps here. In others, you'll see just a common curve where all of them fall neatly in unison, just slightly below one another as you get into the small and mid-sized organizations. You also see that we have roughly a third, and a third of organizations. So a third in this deficient area, a third doing the essentials, and typically a third who are doing a bit better. We can also see as we look at this that generally large organizations are doing better. So the green ones are doing slightly better, are more mature on this measure than are the small and mid-sized organizations. So what we see here data-wise is that roughly 2/3, so 62.7% are level 3 or above. And that means that a bit fewer than 2/3 of respondents say that their organizations have at least the essentials in place when it comes to the people side of information governance. So the IG body that they have might be informal, they may be responding reactively, but at least they have people identified, tasked, and given enough authority to make basic IG decisions. Now, about a third fall in the proactive and transformational levels, with 24.5% and 9.5 in level 4 and level 5 respectively. But still, and all that's very promising, we have about a third who are falling in this deficient category. Now, on average, this parameter, and it surprised us a little bit, was less mature than other parameters that we'll look at as we go through the rest of the data. Do you have anything to add on this one, Nick?
Nope.
Nope. You good? All right.
Good.
So next we turn to authorities. Authorities are the elements that serve as the guide rails for your organization's information governance efforts. Roughly, these are the rules of the road that help guide IG decision making. So things that we have in mind are authoritative frameworks, privacy requirements, standards and best practices, regulations. So think of those as external guidelines. But we also have internal guidelines like your organization's risk tolerance or the organizational culture that have to be considered as well. If you're evaluating your organization's IG program with respect to this area, you'd want to consider things like whether your organization's legal, regulatory compliance, and business needs are clearly understood. Are they documented? Are they being followed? Have appropriate standards and best practices been identified? Are your organization's culture and risk tolerance understood well enough to actually incorporate those into IG decision making? Often people don't think about this and they run into it you know, at suboptimal times, I'll just put it that way. And then the other thing is, are relevant authorities being periodically reviewed and kept current? It's not enough to do a point in time for these. You have to keep up to date and make sure that you're incorporating those changes into decision-making processes, as well as documenting those things as well. So again, we asked respondents to select the maturity level that best described their organization with respect to this. And these are the results that we saw. So a clear majority here, it's 72.1% fell within the essentials or above. This shows that nearly 3/4 of respondents think that their organizations have at least the essentials in place when it comes to understanding and meeting both those internal and external rules that guide IG decision making. So some organizations, ones that are falling in this area, may just be meeting the minimum regulatory compliance and business needs, and they also may be responding reactively to changes, but they're getting the job done at least. Almost 41% fell in the proactive and transformational phases, so levels 4 and 5, with 27.2% at the proactive level and 12.9% of respondents at transformational. So comparatively, organizations tend to be somewhat more mature in this measure than in some of the other areas of the IGIM that we're going to look at. And we also, of course, see that some are falling behind. We have about 1/4 of the respondents saying that they are deficient, with 2.6 at the suboptimal level, level 1, and about 22% still in development. Next, we turn to supports. These are the elements that your organization has available that will help you establish your IG program. These include things like change management, project management, communications, organizational learning and training, as well as help desk and frequently asked questions. Things that you might consider if you were assessing your IG maturity with respect to supports are, are all of your necessary supports in place? Is something missing? For existing supports, are they actually being used? Are they helpful? Do they apply a consistent, repeatable methodology? Are these supports proactively incorporated into IG products or initiatives, or created and added to projects ad hoc? That's a common problem. So people are using some kind of methodology, but it's not consistent from one project to another. It has to be reinvented each time. Are lessons learned incorporated to improve support structures as you go forward? Do you take those lessons from each of those IG projects and make sure that you're capitalizing them as you go, capitalizing on them as you go, excuse me. So what did we see here? Again, we see a clear majority of organizations, 67%, are at essential or higher. And this is somewhat lower than what we just saw for authorities, which is almost at 3/4 in terms of maturity. This indicates that more than 2/3 of respondents say their organizations have at least the essentials in place when it comes to these underlying supports. To be clear, some of these may, again, be doing this on an ad hoc basis, but they're still, again, getting the job done at least at a minimum level. We have over 1/3 in this area falling in the level 4 and level 5, and approximately 30% who are falling in that deficient category, the categories level 1 and level 2. The next area we looked at was processes. These are the things that ensure consistency in your organization's IG program. These include metrics, policies, procedures, rules, roles, benchmarking, and accountability. They help to implement your IG program through an informed and consistent decision-making process, and to help measure and assess the results of the work that you're doing. So that's a little bit of what we're doing here to bring it out of the realm of opinion and into the world of metrics. When you're evaluating your organization's program with respect to this area, you want to consider whether policies and procedures and rules, et cetera, are clearly defined and followed. Are people regularly trained on these? Are rules clear? Are they defined? Are people held accountable for their obligations? Are metrics and benchmarking being used to measure program processes and inform decision making processes? So what did we see here? This one, unfortunately, and maybe surprisingly, was a little less mature. We still had a clear majority of organizations falling in level 3 or above. We were at 64.4%. So again, we're nearly 2/3 of respondents said their organizations have at least the essentials in place when it comes to the various elements that ensure consistency in an IG program. But 29% of them were doing a bit better. And then we still had a significant portion of these, or roughly 33%, who were in the deficient areas, with 5% at level 1 and 28% at level 2 in terms of their development. Again, this is slightly lower, and this is an area that is critical, of course, for successful IG program implementation. So it's disappointing to see this lower than some of the other measures we looked at.
Yeah, and in our chat, Randy Mahler says he's a bit shocked at this result on that one, and I think we all sort of echoed that as we were looking at the data, that this one sort of lagged behind a bit.
And I guess, I mean, also in my mind too, it's shocked or it's somewhat disappointed in that it's such an important part of a successful IG program, and it seems to be one that I would expect our community to be doing better in, but unfortunately that's not the case. The next one, capabilities. So capabilities reflect what's in place to guide information through the organization throughout its information lifecycle, and you can see we have the information life cycle here, sort of surrounded by access, protection, and privacy, as well as your ability to search for that information. As this visualization shows, those are sort of critical to all of those steps along the information life cycle as something is moving through your organization from the moment it's captured to the moment it's disposed or archived. You have to address all of those other considerations, and that's the reason for the structuring of this. You'd want to consider in this, if you're evaluating your program with respect to capabilities, does the correct information get into the right hands when it's needed? So right person, right place, right time. Is information protected throughout its entire information life cycle so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands? So balancing access is also, on the other side of that is balancing security and protecting that information. Are internal and external threats to information being addressed? is a consistent life cycle. This is a consistent life cycle being applied to all of your information, regardless of its format or location. So here's what we saw. And happily, a solid majority, again, you'll hear this again, it's a solid majority across across all of the measures we looked at, but here it's even more than we saw in the previous measure. 72% of respondents reported that their organization's maturity levels in this were at a level 3 or higher. So this shows that nearly 3/4 of respondents think their organizations have the essentials in place with respect to guiding information through its life cycle, getting the right information to the right place at the right time. And again, conversely, making sure it doesn't get into the wrong hands at the wrong time. Some organizations may only be meeting the basics. Some of these steps might be handled manually or again on an ad hoc basis. We see that sometimes with disposition, for example. But more than a third are finding themselves at level 4 or above, with 29.5% at least handling things proactively, and almost 10% saying that they're at a transformational level with respect to this. We have roughly 1/4 of respondents saying that they're in the deficient levels, only 4% saying that they basically have nothing in place, and a solid 20% or so at level 3 that they're still in development with substantial gaps.
We're hoping to see that'll change in the next survey, because retention and disposition are clearly elements that are still a little bit of a challenge across many organizations, where the structure has been put in place, but the final decision to ultimately dispose of redundant, outdated, or trivial information is holding some of those organizations back. Typically at the executive level, where there's this sense of, well, hold on a second, don't delete this just yet, when in fact they should trust their programs, and they should be making that final decision to delete this information, because it fundamentally represents risk. And what I'm hoping to see is that organizations, on the next survey, will be encouraged to take that step and to move from essential to proactive, or hopefully even better, transformational. Because when you're finally trusting your programs and you're making those decisions to eliminate rot from your organization, that becomes transformational, right? That's where you're able to eliminate risk of data breach. That's where you're able to eliminate cost of storing and moving information around that's no longer needed by your organization. And so we're encouraged where it's at, and I think that hopefully in the coming survey we'll see this quick bump to the right hand side as organizations finally do decide to get rid of things they don't need.
Yeah, that pulling the trigger is what we need people to take the step, and we certainly have the technology to do this very well.
And this one's really interesting to look at. We're going to look at these comparatively later in the slides here, but this one's a really interesting one. The quarter of folks that are deficient in this area, level 1 or level 2, that presents some pretty significant risk. So that's quite concerning as well. I mean, I'm hopeful. The result is hopeful in that it's further along than some of the other areas of the IJM, but still, those folks that are lagging behind in these areas, that is not an unsubstantial amount of risk that they're taking on by being in level 1 or level 2. Absolutely agreed. And just to go back, this is the core of the movement of your information through your organization. Again, right hands, the right information, right hands, right time. And of course that means access and applying appropriate security around it. If you're failing on this, it's a serious problem. So the next one, and I have to step up the pace here a little bit. So structures, basically these are the building blocks of your information organization. We're thinking, storage structure, your information architecture, your technology architecture.
I'm sorry, excuse me, storage structures, your information architecture, your taxonomy, your metadata, as well as your technology architecture. So this is the sort of data, the mapping of your systems, as well as formats and protocols. When you're evaluating your program with respect to this area, you want to consider whether you have a consistent taxonomy. Are you using taxonomy and metadata across systems? Is it consistent? Does your information architecture show how your information in your organization is related? Is your technology architecture, and we'll get to this when we get to infrastructure, the systems and application, are they mapped? Do you know what you have? Are those systems and applications rationalized against one another? What did we see here? So again, we see a majority of organizations are at level 3 or above, but it's slightly less mature than the other measures. Some of the other measures we looked at, we had 62.2% of respondents saying that they are at essential or higher, and a slightly smaller percentage, only 30%, were at proactive or transformational. And we had, around 33%, almost a third of respondents that were in the deficient zones with respect to structures. Nick, did you have any comments on this one? I know you had thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, again, we did have a clear majority of respondents at level 3 or above, but these numbers are again concerning. This is an area where, I personally expected we would see stronger results in this, especially given our community's composition. But I think this further highlights the fact that structuring our information remains an incredible challenge, and doing so in the context of our technology architecture can be even more so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that 62.2% at level 3 or above is a hopeful figure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still deeply concerned about the organizations that put themselves at level 1 or level 2 here. Not having solid information structure in place means diminished returns on other information related efforts. And organizations at those levels shouldn't really be considering any type of advanced technologies such as big data analysis or
Mm-hmm.
automation, as without the proper information structure, those efforts are very unlikely to be successful as well, in my.
I think one of the problems is, one of the challenges, we often see little pockets of excellence in, say, metadata, but sort of spanning an entire organization is where where organizations tend to fall a little bit flat. And again, for those organization-wide efforts, that transformational step, you really need to have those in place at an organizational level. All right, so the next and final area of the IGIM is infrastructure. Infrastructure basically represents the technological abilities that underpin your organization's information system. So basically, the information systems that do what you need them to do to meet your organization's objectives. So we talked about structures before. Here we're talking now about the applications and software, your networks and connectivity, hosting cloud and servers, SLAs and licensing, as well as information security. And you've seen information security come up a couple times, and where it belongs in this model is, it belongs in multiple places, and so that's the reason for this repeat here. When you're evaluating your program with respect to this area, you want to see if you have the right applications and software, for example, in place to meet your organization's needs. That's not always the best in breed. It's what's best for your organization. Are the tools, integrated in your system? Are your networks and connectivity adequate? If you have SLAs, internal and third party, are you meeting those objectives? Are contracts tracked, managed, and enforced, for example? And then, of course, across all of this is information security monitoring in place over all of these systems. And as you have the more complex your environment becomes, the more difficult that can become as well. So what did we see here? This was actually a little bit more promising. The maturity on this measure was actually higher than in some other areas. 73% of organizations found themselves at the level 3 or above. And that means that nearly 3/4 of organizations say their organizations have at least the essentials in place or better when it comes to their information systems that help them achieve their organization objectives. Again, this is with respect to software and applications and network connectivity. 41.9% are saying that they're exceeding the essentials, with roughly a third at level 4 and almost 10% at transformational level. And then we have less than 25% falling in the deficient category here.
Yeah,
Nick,
yeah, clearly organizations believe that they have a lot of the right technology in place to support their organizations, but it's impossible to look at this technology landscape for me with a positive view without also looking at it in context of particularly the results around structures. Great technology can't solve information problems without the right people making the right decisions around the right policies and the right practices around information. While we may have what we believe to be the right technology, I have some strong reservations on this point. And Michael, I'm sure you have some interesting thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, very definitely. I mean, like you say, you cannot have great infrastructure and poor policy or poor processes. And one of the surprising things, I guess, overall in this is that in the context of things like GDPR, with subject access requests, with the California Consumer Privacy Act, and the similar type of provision for subject access request, we need to see organizations further to the right than they are today. Just the subject access request is going to get organizations into a lot of trouble if they can't satisfy it.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think that what encourages me, though, is that we have the highest percentage of organizations who responded that they're transformational. So what encourages me of that is that there's a lot of organizations who figured out how to really leverage the power of technology to make a marked and lasting impact on their organizations, right? So once you're invested, it's possible to get there and to really experience some dramatic return on investment and shift the posture of your organization to a much more positive place. So that for me is encouraging. At the same time, yes, the caution that a lot of investment has been made, and I'll compare it a little bit. We hear about manufacturing 4.0, right? Where this evolution, we're sort of at that. Here we're at the information governance 3.0, where we've invested into the tools and the technology, but we really haven't figured out how to use them consistently across our organization and our departments to be transformational. So it's kind of a combination, good news, bad news, right? What we don't want to see is we don't want to see more investment in technology where we think it's the pixie dust, and that just putting more technology out there is going to make the situation better without first investing in process and policy, right? They have to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to leave some time, make sure we have some time for questions too. So with the vantage point of having just looked at the 7 key areas of the IGIM, respondents were then asked to rank their organization's overall program maturity. And I'm not going to belabor the discussion of this too much because that's sort of a composite of what we've just seen. Again, we have a majority who see themselves at essential or higher, but we still have a solid group of individuals or respondents saying that their organizations, this is roughly 30%, saying that they are deficient. The next thing we did, and this is kind of a neat graphic, but I want to, it's a little much to look at first, so I want to orient you to it. We looked at these different measures side by side. So we looked at the 8 maturity measures side by side to facilitate the comparison across them. Remember, we had talked about the essentials or above. We grouped the levels 3, 4, and 5 together and aggregated those, and we considered those as established programs. We also grouped the levels 1 and 2 as deficient organization, in terms of their maturity level, and that's what you see here. So the green here is it represents the organizations that are established, and the red represents organizations that are deficient. And we put these in concentric circles so that you can see the outer concentric circle is all organizations, and then as you drill deeper in, it goes to the large organizations, and in the center, the smaller ones. And what this allows you to do is, if you get yourself oriented to this graphic, you can easily see that certain measures are more mature than others. So ones we've already flagged, you can see we're roughly higher in authorities. You can see the circle runs over a little bit more. Infrastructure as well as capabilities are the three most mature, and the others are, again, falling behind. I'm going to move a little bit past this one just so that we have some time for questions, but I encourage you, when you get to this graphic in the report, that you take some time to look at it, and it really does allow you to see pretty quickly how across these different parameters, organizations overall, or further divided into small and mid-sized organizations or large organizations, compare across each of these 8 parameters. So next we'll move to just conclusions and next steps. Just quickly, the highlights that we saw from this: a clear majority of organizations are at essentials or better for all 8 maturity measures. A substantial portion are still deficient. We have range from 1/4 to around 1/3 organizations saying they're deficient on one or more of these parameters. They tend to be more mature in authorities, capabilities, and infrastructure. And then large organizations on average are generally more mature than the small and mid-sized organizations, but they're not really outstripping them by a significant margin. It's usually a difference of about 10%. So conclusions and next steps, how to use this report and graphics. Nick, can you talk about that?
Absolutely. The key purposes of the survey was to generate the report and to build educational resources that are tied to the IGIM to help IG professionals implement and improve their programs. If you haven't taken the survey yet, please consider doing so. We're going to make that available again soon. So you can find out where your organization stands with respect to the 7 areas of the IGIM and overall. If you were one of the people that did take the survey, thank you for helping us to build this resource. You can, of course, compare your organization to the results presented here as a benchmark. Are you ahead of the curve? Are you falling behind others? That information can really be used to help others, convince others in your organization of the importance of addressing deficiencies or making improvements in the various areas. The report and graphics are going to be released under an open source license. They will be available for you to utilize. That is the whole point, is to take this and really use it and justify it in your organization. And this is something that we'll be doing on an annual basis. So every year we'll have a new version of this report, and we'll be able to track the progress of this over time. But the whole point of this is to make it useful for you and for your organization to move your organization's maturity forward in information governance.
A little bit of a preview. A lot of the people on the chat were asking about the ability to look at the data in different ways, by geography, by size, by industry. And so in the 6-week time frame, approximately, we'll be releasing, in collaboration with ARMA, a site that will enable you to do that, to actually log in and run a comparison to your program and to your results, but really drilling down specifically on your industry, your size, your geography. And so we hope that precision will help even more so in terms of the analysis and the next steps that you need to do.
And just to add to this, we should consider this report a call to action. The data that we see here support a promising conclusion that organizations are taking information governance seriously, but there's still significant room for improvement beyond just doing the basics. The other thing is, this unfortunately only represents a single point in time. We don't have an identical measure of IG maturity in the past, but if it's your sense that IG programs and the profession in general are maturing, that's our sense too. And we're cautiously holding judgment analysis of this kind until next year, when we can actually, when we actually have next year's data in hand and can actually do a year-over-year comparison. The other thing is that a sizable portion of respondents are still deficient overall or with respect to one or more of the IG measures. And this has been said by a couple people already in this webinar. It's 2020. After a myriad of data breaches, changes mandated by privacy regulations, calls for just, data mining and promises of, everyone talks about a digital transformation and literally years of talking about the importance of governing our information better and properly. It's astounding in some ways that such a significant portion of organizations are in the level 1 and 2 categories. If your organization doesn't have at least those essentials in place, it's failing to treat information as the valuable asset it is, and it's unnecessarily exposing itself to risks with potentially very, very serious consequences. And so our call to action is that you need to do something now, and hopefully this tool and the resources connected to it will enable you to implement a program where you don't have one, or make the improvements that you need to if you are just looking to step up a level or two in maturity. And then I think Nick has already talked a little bit about the graphic citation and IGM related resources. Pierre has also mentioned some things that are coming out. You can find information about the IGIM at this URL, https://arma.org/IGM, and then you'll be able to download the report at the IG-report. We will always keep the model updated at the IGIM URL. The new release of it will be up there shortly. And we look forward to answering some questions now.
Yeah, let's move into the Q&A portion of our program. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, unfortunately, Mike Osterman had to drop off. Please enter those in the Q&A box. Again, we're unlikely to get to all the questions, but we'll sure to pass those along afterwards. We will extend briefly beyond the top of the hour so that we can take the time to answer your questions directly. To start our first question, I'll direct that over to Pierre because I think you have some thoughts on this. This person asks, when we have the data to evaluate our programs, how can we convince our leadership that these are results that we should be taking action on?
It all comes down to, better risk management. What we're seeing now is an acceleration in terms of cybersecurity. Underwriters are now looking deeply into organizations' capabilities and their ability to have proper information governance capabilities and to execute on them as an integral part of the risk assessment that they're going to make in terms of providing coverage for that organization, right? And so, just that is probably significant enough to convince the leadership. We're also going to start working together with ARMA on some much clearer return on investment tools that will provide the clear financial impact of not doing the right thing. And so having right now, just having a baseline and being able to go into your organization, say, here's how we scored. By the way, here's how the industry scores, and we're laggards, right? We're deficient, and as such, we represent risk. It starts the conversation, and I think that's the most important thing, is just get the conversation going with your leadership, and shine a light on the fact that, like Anne said, that it's unacceptable for us as an organization to not be addressing this and to be turning a little bit of a blind eye. It's known, for those of you who read the book, The Black Swan, humans are pretty good at being able to predict things that have a high chance of happening and that will not have a catastrophic impact. But we're really, really bad at predicting things that are very unlikely to happen and that will have an absolutely catastrophic impact. And we've seen enough of those. We've seen companies get wiped out. We've seen budgets get reallocated in significant ways as a result of not having seen these things happen. And so let's be proactive. Let's move out and say, hey, we don't want to be the black swan. We don't want to be the company that didn't see this coming. Because with this result, with this survey, we're now able to, everybody can say, well, we now could see it coming.
Yeah. And I'm going to take a couple of these questions myself here. The recording of the webinar will be available to all of the attendees within 3 days. We'll email out a recording of this webinar so that if you missed a portion or you want to share it with your boss or a colleague, you'll have a copy of that available. The report itself, as well as a downloadable image pack that will have a lot of these graphics that you can use in your own reports to your executive leadership. You can use in your presentations. I'm sure we'll see these graphics a few times at the ARMA conference. All of that will be available next week. We'll be releasing that. Every single person who is attending this webinar today will get a copy of that just neatly sent to you in your email of the report. The images pack being a little bit larger, you'll have to click over to that one. I think that takes care of about a third of the questions that are here. Anne, I'll pass this one to you. When you have the results for next year, what are ARMA's plans for looking at year-over-year results for analysis?
Well, again, it's one of those. So we're going to try to present those in an easily digestible format, and obviously we want to see if we're seeing an uptick in the results, in any of the maturity measures. So just a standard year-over-year comparison. We'll be using the same parameters, assessing on the same parameters. So that will facilitate that year-over-year comparison. That's a problem. We haven't had a consistent and simple measure of maturity multiple years in a row to be allowed to do that. And so this will be a chance to finally have that. And again, we're going to keep those questions consistent so that people, so that there is some fidelity with the year-over-year comparison. So I hope that answers your question on that one.
Yeah, I think that's
so. I
good.
think that the graphical challenge is, so it's how do you represent that easily? So I think the report will be longer, and we'll certainly present the information divided in different ways. So we'll probably do overall IG maturity with a year-over-year comparison, as opposed to doing the breakdown by industries, or that will be in a separate section for people's reference. So I think it'll be a little bit more graphics heavy, and then we'll probably focus on the comparison a little bit more next year, of course, with that new data. And I'd love to do an industry. I really am itching to do an industry segmentation, but we just didn't have the data to do that this year.
You really are itching to do that.
I am.
We've got another question here. This one might have been a good one with Michael, so we might get back to you after the fact for some additional answers on this one. But how will future surveys ensure that you're widely sampling from smaller organizations? She mentioned in a previous comment that the smaller organizations may not be able to be at the ARMA conference, may not have the funding for things like that. Will there be more involved targeting methods in the future?
So I would say, at least I think with any traction that we get with this model, when people see that it's out there, certainly, I think we'll be able to get it to more people. We certainly weren't limited to survey respondents at the conference. We did have, a robust period of time where, it was almost 2 months that we kept it open online. So just making sure that we distribute that survey more effectively. And we certainly have sent it out multiple times to the ARMA audience, and would encourage other people to share that survey link, with anyone they think should be responding to it. So, we're hoping, I really hope that with the traction we get from this year, that we'll get more of those respondents.
And I think that it took us a little bit longer than we expected between, and we wanted to have enough time to let enough respondents. But leading up to InfoCon, I think that we'll be able to probably publish an updated result towards the end of 2020, as opposed to in March 2021. So it'll either be a comparison late this year as a first interim benchmark, or at the very latest it'll be early January And then with the site going live and the ability to come in and measure yourself, it'll be evolving. Obviously, we'll have bursts of respondents around the survey time around InfoCon, but you'll be able to slice and dice the response also on a time scale and compare yourself to all of the results up until X date, and then from date, in this date range. And so it'll become a much more dynamic visualization tool as well.
But for the point in time, so what we do for next year, we will try to keep the same point in time, so we have a year-over-year comparison.
January is good.
I'm going to take this last one. I'll share this with both of you. I think you'll both have some interesting thoughts on this one. But this will be our last question for this session. I'm a records manager aligned with our agency's information services department. I'm having a difficult time with convincing my boss that an IG effort is needed. I think the mindset is that IT owns this issue and that it can be addressed by hiring a vendor to draft our department's strategic plan. How can I help my boss expand their perspective and embrace a broader approach?
2 words: vendor lock-in.
Yeah.
And no, it is. I mean, part of what we're trying to do here is to get ARMA to help the industry, the technology industry, to move away from this posture, this historic posture that we develop proprietary solutions with proprietary APIs with no ability to share encoding of data or metadata, and that if we merge or demerge or try to somehow move to another solution, we end up starting all over again, and effectively laying waste to the technology investments and the process investments that we've made. And so probably the last thing that you want to do is have a vendor be the one dictating your IG program. ARMA has done a terrific job of laying out, mapping out what those primary elements are. And so yes, involve vendors for their expertise, for their knowledge in how these things work, but they should be involved, but not be the ones that are responsible for the final outcome, because you'll probably end up in a place where you don't want to be at some point as a result of having entrusted everything. And we're just as a company that's been at this since 2001 and seen so many horror stories. We believe organizations should own their data, and own in every sense of the word, right? Physically, there should be nothing that prevents you from leaving with your data. No cloud provider. It should just be your data, and you get to do with it what you want. And so any vendor that doesn't live up to that philosophy, which I believe is very closely aligned to ARMA's philosophy, is doing you a disservice.
That's a great answer coming from a vendor. I just want to highlight that.
When you said vendor lock-in, I was thinking you were going into a different direction, and so yeah, I think this is a great answer. The other thing, in terms of what do you do, we've encouraged people to use the tools that we've set forth here. So take the survey, do an assessment, and these infographics are going to be available to you and show where the industry, the profession is, and where you think your organization falls. Again, it's a very common problem, throwing technology at the issues without having those other items in place, like processes or your other structures and things like that. So not getting, not having appropriate securities, but having the great bells and whistles in an application or something. That's lovely, but if you can't secure your information appropriately or get it where it needs to be when it needs to be there, that's not good enough. So those things often, the best technology operating in isolation from the other best technology isn't very helpful. So, and that's where we're seeing some of the deficiencies in the data that we just presented. So I would advocate taking this survey and using the graphics and the information that we've provided in the report to go to your boss and try to get get a meeting on the table and try to get a conversation started based on the actual data we have here.
Yeah, and with that, thank you to all of our participants for sticking around with us as we went a little over time. I want to thank Anne, Pierre, and Michael for today's webinar, and thank them for continuing to serve this community by sharing their knowledge. Our next webinar is going to be announced soon, so keep an eye on your email box. ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing your business partners and solutions for your information governance needs, I hope you will give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you, solution providers like NetGovern. I want to also give a personal thank you to Pierre Chamberlain and the entire NetGovern team. More caffeine.
Oh, thanks.
For getting behind this project, not only financially, but for taking an active participant role, giving feedback, helping us to partner with Michael Osterman and his expertise. You really believed in this vision and helped us drive it forward for the benefit of the entire community, and that's very appreciated. Before we close, I'd like you to remind you to become a professional member of ARMA International. Take the time to invest in yourself, and while you're at it, pre-register for the ARMA conference in Detroit, Rock City, this October. ARMA has an array of resources available to you, from our white papers to our training to our magazine. In our magazine right now, you can read 2 recent terrific pieces, one about closing the gaps in FOIA responsiveness by Michael Maitland, and the other on what IG professionals should know about the Internet of Bodies. Thought-provoking, forward-looking article by Judy Vasek-Sitton. You can read those now at magazine.arma.org, along with an array of other articles. On behalf of our speakers, the wonderful folks at NetGovern who give of their time and money to sponsor programming like this webinar today, the Osterman research team who supported this project, and all of us at ARMA International, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar and wish you all the best in all of your information endeavors. Have a great day.